Hi everybody, how's it going? This is Riste. Anybody who doesn't know who I am, well, welcome to the channel. I'm a North American Challenger Garen main, and in today's video, I'm going to be covering the new change list that Riot Games has published on the PBE pertaining to the Garen miniature rework and what it means for the champion. What we're covering in today's video is going to be pretty substantial because they are doing several things that are different from the last change list, including getting rid of the on-hit. And I don't know if it was intended or not, but we're dealing with a new animation cancel as well that we will be covering in today's video. So I hope you guys enjoy. Here's how it's going to go down. So I've been talking to a lot of Garen mains over the course of the last few weeks about this rework. There's a lot of people who are looking forward to what's coming, and there's a lot of people who aren't. I'm talking to Garen mains of all different ranks, of all different play rates, and how long they've been playing the champion, no matter the longevity. And there's a lot of mixed reception. There's a lot of people that are just looking forward to this rework, and there's a lot that just dread it and want it to change. I think the rework is headed in a good direction myself personally, although in order for that direction to basically solidify to something that's going to be satisfactory for Garen mains as a whole, I think they had to get rid of the on-hit. Now, we'll talk about the removal on hit first. We're going to be addressing Garen's E. Garen's spin no longer applies on hit effects, and I know that some of you guys are really bummed out by that. But the more I've thought about it and the more I've executed it on the PBE, in addition to seeing other YouTubers attempt the builds as well, the more I'm starting to believe that it's not healthy for the game in general. It's difficult because if you compare Garen's accessibility for on-hit to something like Urgot's able to really pilot with an on-hit interaction because his on-hit ability, his Gatling machine gun, has several restrictions, right? He can only fire on one target. Right, he moves very slowly while doing it. Garen gets to freely move while also hitting multiple targets. Now, your on-hit effect only applies to one target, but the thing is, like, if you're hitting multiple people, you're also hitting other enemy champions as well, on top of applying massive on-hit damage. So, because of that and how potent and powerful it can be, especially addressing Garen's potency in low elo with these builds, I just feel like it's not going to be a healthy change. That's also going to create too many edge cases that opens up brand new counterplay options to Garen, such as Thornmail, Rammus, Shen, who can apparently block Garen's spin completely with his Spirit's Refuge. So I just really feel like it's too much of a mess for Riot Games to balance, and ultimately they should just go ahead and part ways with the potential change. But even though that does go away, there is still hope for Garen's spin to be better, and this is what they're doing with the new change. They're keeping the attack speed model. However, the new threshold to get one additional spin, where we start with 8, right? We start with 8 at level 1 with the new Garen. The threshold and the prerequisite to get an additional spin is now 20% bonus attack speed instead of 25. I talked to Riot Axis about how this is going to be implemented. He told me that they're basing the new attack speed model spin based on Kai'Sa's attack speed model, where Garen's spins can only increase based on permanent sources of attack damage. This means that temporary sources, or runes for that matter, do not get to interfere with this type of construct. This means that Lethal Tempo, Hail of Blades, and Legend Alacrity are not going to be having any input into the spin whatsoever. So it means you're going to be depending on itemization choices like either Trinity Force, Phantom Dancer, or maybe even Blade the Roan King to possibly take on your opponent's late game. And I really feel like that the damage itself is promising. Garen's base attack speed will get you 2 spins late game, which equals to the same amount currently on live, which is 10 spins total. But with just a normal bruiser build, like featuring possibly Trinity Force and a Phantom Dancer, you can get up to 14 spins, which severely increases your damage output. Here's some footage I'm going to go ahead and show you right now, basically with the test dummy. And keep in mind, guys, that the test dummy has 100 armor. I'm hitting that person with my full combo, and I'm able to do 3k damage with just the Q and spin combo. That is pretty significant damage. And I really feel like that the main concern about this whole attack speed interaction is, with other Garen mains, is that they're going to be building more fragile to basically do damage. And I still think that you can still create a build that makes Garen somewhat durable, and to be able to pump out damage at the same time. I originally talked about what this rework was trying to accomplish, bring up Garen's durability to go ahead and increase the amount of room for him to be buffed, right? Because he needs to be a budgeted champion. That's how healthy champions exist in this game. So by freeing up his durability and then lowering his W by 20, the max stacks, of course, the bonus armor and magic resistance by 20, they're able to increase the damage late game, and it's also not tied to the villain mechanic, and I think that's really, really good. Juggernauts historically have always been feast or famine champions. Obviously, there's a few exceptions to this equation, but we're not going to talk about those. In the realistic fantasy of a Juggernaut, you know, they're kind of feast or famine champions, right? Very, very strong or possibly oppressive if they're ahead, but also lacking quite a bit if behind, right? It's just basically how the champion class snowballs, right? No matter if you're ahead with Darius, you know, no matter if you're ahead with Urgot, you know, Garen, you should be able to hit hard if you're ahead. However, it doesn't really live up to Garen's fantasy currently in the game. You know, you could be really, really fed. You could possibly get over 200 attack damage past 20 minutes, and you could say to yourself, okay, well, I'm fed, but the thing is, your damage is still tied to the villain mechanic, and even if you put 5 points into your spin judgment, your damage is still not fully scaled until level 16, because Garen's current spin is tied to levels. So I really feel like just the removal of the villain mechanic is going to free up a Garen player to basically hit harder when they snowball, but it also means that you're noticeably a little bit weaker when you fall behind and you don't hit laning phase, you know, with the ground running. So obviously with these changes to Garen's passive, Garen's laning phase does get increased in viability. So that's really, really good because Garen's a champion that is basically thematically tied to the War of Attrition. The War of Attrition is basically trying to pressure someone else's resources and winning a war or a battle over the long haul by expending those said resources. And Garen can do that basically by taking minuscule trades that he barely loses or goes even with, and just outsustains the opponent through his passive. And that's basically how any high-low Garen operates, unless you're tinkering with the villain mechanic or they're just as the villain, you can go ahead and 100 to 0 them. But that's kind of a rare opportunity because your opponent isn't always the villain, right? So I still am a big supporter of these passive changes because you will notice Garen's passive is going to be stronger in laning phase, and this is really, really good because Garen should be a threatening juggernaut, but the thing is his early game is so weak. The more you climb in high elo, the more you'll notice that you just can't trade with these certain lane opponents. Even tanks such as Maokai, I have such a big difficult time trading with, and it's just really, really irking or even frustrating to many players how Garen just really can't dominate certain classes that his champion class should technically be able to beat, and everyone else, you know, is doing so. Obviously taking Conqueror, of course, too, but we're going to talk about that in a little bit because with the change to Garen's spin removal on hit, Right Axis is still trying to ship a model that allows Garen to stack Conqueror, and that's pretty exciting because I know a lot of people I talk to, especially Garen mains, really want Garen to be able to stack Conqueror fully, and I am somewhat on the side of Garen still being able to pilot Conqueror, because I really feel like Garen needs to be able to have winning matchups versus tanks. And right now, he doesn't have a rune that basically allows him to trade or outskill tanks. Like, tanks are subtly being buffed right now. We're seeing this because we've seen the buffs to Poppy. We've seen the buffs to Malphite. I'm only thinking it's a matter of time before Riot gets creative and buffs Ornn and Maokai. And this is a really, really big surfacing power creep issue for Garen that needs to be addressed, I think, possibly and solved with Conqueror, because if Garen doesn't get any anti-tank extra tools that get addressed or added to his kit, he basically is going to turn himself into a losing matchup versus these champions. And it's only going to get worse as Riot Games finds creative ways to put subtle buffs on these champions. And if they do get buffed, their play rate basically increases. And it just creates more of a problematic situation for Garen, because you would think that Garen wins versus these matchups, but it really doesn't happen. Even realistically, currently, when I'm playing versus champions like Poppy, I'm rushing items such as Raptor's Cloak and waiting for the champion to go out of mana, so that way I can actually start trading with the champion. It's really, really crazy. So Garen's able to stack Conqueror in the same speed that you're currently seeing on the PvE and what you've seen past week when they had those other changes when on-hit effects were applied. I think that's really, really cool. Another concern that a lot of Garen players are talking to me about is that the damage on spin is just not going to be there. And I want to go ahead and address Garen's isolation change, because I really feel like a lot of Garen players that I'm talking to and a lot of Garen players in whole are basically downplaying how significant this new isolation mechanic is really going to be, because it's definitely better, I believe, than the current isolation bonus. So we'll talk about both really quickly. Garen's isolation bonus currently on live applies 33% bonus damage if only hitting one enemy. Now that's pretty significant, because if you think about how Garen trades in laning phase or any top laner, you're fighting in minion waves almost all the time. It's a very fundamental type of metric in League of Legends to use your minions to your advantage to maximize and minimize trades, right? And any skilled top laner or any skilled solo laner will use their minions to advantage, and any laner that's against a Garen who understands that Garen's spin gets isolation bonus damage will always stay in their mini wave to make sure you never trigger this. Now this is a very, very frustrating experience for Garen's, because if a player stays in their mini wave, you can never trigger that isolation bonus. Unless you're forcing that opponent away from the wave because of jungle assistance, or you basically have the villain mark on them, they're basically going to stay in their wave the entire time, and you really can't do anything. But this changes with this new equation here, with the new isolation mechanic, because now you apply 25% bonus damage, which is 8% less than 33, of course. But it's applied to the nearest enemy. And this is very, very significantly different here, because now you can trigger that isolation bonus even in a mini wave. Now, of course, you're going to have to position your spin appropriately, so you're hitting that target, of course, but you still have the potency to trigger the isolation bonus if your positioning is correct, and you can even take advantage of people who don't understand the mechanic too well, even if they're in the mini wave. That's the thing, right? Not too many people will know that Garen has an isolation bonus on his spin, but even if they just play smartly in the mini wave, they get to avoid it anyway. So even they get compensated for that lack of knowledge on live right now, which I feel like shouldn't be a thing, because I really feel like those little hidden mechanics, or those little quirks to a champion, really can help push individual skill level and execution, while also allowing counterplay as well. This I believe is the safest way to amplify Garen's damage, while also allowing counterplay for the opponent. If you buff Garen's spin damage just purely with the ratio and the base damage, it's just going to create oppressive situations where Garen's this unbeatable juggernaut that you can't get out of lane. He basically stays in lane forever, and you have to take teleport to basically get your purchases. Otherwise, you're going to lose out in mini wave and a half as you're recalling. And it's going to bring us back to Season 1 Garen. And I don't think anybody wants that. I really support these changes, because it allows Garen to have counterplay while also giving a Garen player ways to increase his skill cap and obviously his damage. So that's really, really cool. I'm definitely a big supporter of this new isolation mechanic. And it's even better in teamfights too, because if you're hitting multiple targets in a teamfight, by chance if somebody's like piling on top of you, or the enemy team is piling on top of you, you're still going to be applying the isolation bonus to one target instead of no targets at all. And I still think that's going to be good and increase Garen's damage threshold. So that's really, really great. And this is basically what we're getting in return for the villain mechanic being removed. Obviously, there's a few more things that we can cover here. We've addressed the ultimate in a previous video. That's going to be constantly true damage, and I feel like that's really, really well. A lot of people are thinking this is a nerf. It's definitely a buff. Even MR stat shards, nullifying orbs, hex drinkers, and those heal champions buying Spear Visage, right? We're having more and more heal champions buy Spear Visage. They heavily interfere with your potency to execute somebody with your ultimate, just because that MR goes against your magic damage ultimate. Obviously, if they're the villain, you don't have to really worry about that. But the thing is, sometimes you want to kill a target who's not the villain. It makes sense, right? Not every villain's going to be right in front of you. Sometimes you want to kill the person who's in front of you. That's the Juggernaut fantasy, you know? So I really feel like the ultimate change is going to be good. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and move on over to the W, which is still getting reduced from 50 stacks to 30. And then, of course, every stack that you get is going to give you a quarter of a magic resistance instead of 1/3, and then some, right? A lot of Garen players are really concerned about this because it just makes them a little bit less tanky. But I have to argue that even late game, that 50 armor magic resistance doesn't feel like much. There are so many champions right now that build the Black Cleaver. Late game ADCs basically have their Lord Dominic's Regards or Mortal Reminder as core, right, for armor penetration. So I really feel like Garen just not having that much extra armor late game is not going to be noticeable too much, because you're probably just going to turn to butter late game with the amount of armor shred options that are accessible. We even have tank busting ADCs such as Kai'Sa and Vayne, and it just really creates these situations where that 20 bonus armor magic resistance just doesn't get used as much. I can understand completely that you might be getting the vibe that Garen is still feeling like a net nerf after all of these changes, and it definitely is a bit evident in his W, because they're taking a large portion of power out of his W to basically put power and agency into other areas of Garen's kit. And the bigger drop from 50 to 30 is definitely going to be significant. Even if Garen does ship a little weak, I would still prefer that compared to him being overpowered with a 55% plus win rate, because I would prefer to play my champion a little bit weaker compared to him being overpowered and being permabanned, which I'm certain the Garen mains community is definitely going to complain about to some extent. If it does happen. So I really feel like this is just the better overall method, because even if the W is a little weak for today's modernized game, they can always bring the cap back up to 35 or 40, and that can still be a really good approachable late game power boost for Garen if his late game is a little bit too weak. So these numbers that you're looking at, of course, aren't final, like we have addressed in the last video, but they can always bring those numbers back up, which is why I'm not really too afraid of this rework, and a lot of other people are just getting really, really nervous. If Garen ships a little bit too weak, they can always buff one of his categories. It's okay. But I really feel like that this transitional rework needs to happen, because a Garen player who is able to execute the game properly, get a snowball, is going to have more personal power to really decide games, instead of having to abide by the villain mechanic, having to abide by hoping that their opponent doesn't build the armor penetration to basically put Garen into the dumpster late game as quickly as they should. And on top of getting level 11 in a strict and timely manner, so that way you can actually start trading with your lane opponent instead of just hard losing trades, because that's basically Garen's fantasy right now for every top lane matchup. Almost every top lane matchup, except for Wukong. And finally, I know you guys have been waiting for it, we're going to be addressing the animation cancel, which is pretty crazy. I don't know if Riot Games is going to be keeping it, even though Darius technically does have an animation cancel himself. I don't know if they want to put it on Garen. It might be unintentional. You see, what happened was they allowed Garen's Q to basically work in akin to being an auto attack, but they had to recode and restructure the ability so it's treated more like an auto attack. I don't know the whole metrics because I don't do game design. However, if you notice on the PBE currently, guys, if you build a whole truckload of attack speed, the animation for Q goes significantly down. It's definitely significantly more sped up. But the adverse effect of this is, since it's coded as a different ability, you can technically cancel the animation by using your spin as you go ahead and start leaping up in air for Q. I think it's pretty cool, and a lot of Garen players are pretty hyped about it because it does add a little bit more skill expression to Garen's kit. But again, I don't know if Riot Games is going to be keeping it, so I'll keep you guys posted. If it does get removed, I'll be talking to Right Axis about it and see if it's intentional. So just be prepared for it to go if Riot Games doesn't want to keep it. I feel like I've gone on long enough about this rework. Well, lastly, talk about what potential builds you could be seeing if this rework is the ship and what you guys should be looking out for. Obviously, the Black Cleaver Bruiser build is not going to be as viable as before, but can still be a good tank busting option if your ADC is fed, and that's still good. But the build diversity is definitely increasing, and that's what's really, really good. For example, Triforce's viability is going to be going up a little bit more, which is very, very great. Because not only is split pushing definitely a viable option in some games, but the item efficiency is obviously a little concerning right now on live because it's a huge amount of gold, and it does make you a little bit more frail than currently Black Cleaver Garen. So if you're sacrificing that durability for damage, Triforce is definitely going to matter more now. Obviously, you get 2 spins if you buy the Triforce because, of course, it's 40% attack speed, so you get 20% extra spins on your spin. That brings you up from 10 to 12 late game, which is really, really great. So Triforce builds will still be good. Obviously, if you're taking Transcendence or you don't have any other CDR options, you can still throw Black Cleaver on top of it, and you can still be a tank buster for your team while also having significant DPS late game. Also, another thing that I feel like a lot of Garen players are overlooking as this rework is going to pan out is basically how Crit Garen is going to be much, much better. And I feel like Crit Garen is really basically a meme build, but I feel like it could be semi-viable or even completely viable if a Garen player is snowballing and ahead just because of now Phantom Dancer being a much more viable option, right? Obviously, a player will have to sacrifice Sterex by building Phantom Dancer, but if you look at these numbers with a Triforce and Phantom Dancer, the damage is crazily good, as I addressed before. So I don't know what attack speed items will literally be king, but I'm anticipating that Phantom Dancer and Triforce will be the top two. Blade the Run King could possibly be good as well, but I feel like if a player was to build Triforce and then have Conqueror, they shouldn't have much issues with the tank late game anyway, so that should be great. So yeah, definitely look out for Crit Garen, guys. Lethality Garen, I have no opinions on because I really feel like it doesn't really change too much. If anything goes down, because if Crit's viability does go up, I think lethality is going to be kind of neglected. So Bruiser Garen will still be good, although Triforce will definitely have to be considered a little bit more prominently. And if a Garen player really wants to build good DPS, I think Critical Strike will be the new go-to. You have to keep this in mind as well, guys. If you have a spin that lasts 3 seconds and you're getting 14 to 12 spins, that's 14 to 12 times to proc your Critical Strike chance, and if you have 50% crit or higher, you're going to be critting a lot in 3 seconds, and that is some serious DPS, as you guys can tell, obviously, with this below clip. Alright, so keep it in mind, guys. Garen is getting damage options, and Garen will not be weaker in the DPS department. Obviously, we can't really compare it to Villain, because Villain's going away, but it's still subjective because you don't get to decide who you're fighting as a villain. It gets predetermined by, you know, obviously who's getting kills. So there you have it. If these numbers do ship again a little bit weak, Riot Games can always bump them up little by little. So I'm not really too concerned. I'm actually pretty excited to pilot this new Garen because I really feel like it's going to allow a Garen to carry harder if they play the lane with precision, and the tools that he's been given is definitely good. Make sure to follow my goofy self at twitch.tv/riste, where you can find me 6 days a week, where I can also take your questions about the upcoming Garen rework. Alright? Thanks everyone so much for watching, have a wonderful day, and Demacia, baby!